Welcome to this Java Break with Basis. My name is Nico Spence. I'm the Chairman and CEO of Basis International, and today is the second of our series on customer successes with BBX. Today we'll be looking at accessing data from anywhere, and we'll be highlighting our partner EMS and their use of Basis's buoy technology. Let's have a look at our session agenda. All of these sessions cover customer success stories, practical use cases from our developer community, and hopefully you'll see the similarities to your own business needs. We're looking today at EMS Healthcare Informatics and their customer, a large state health department. We'll look at the business challenge facing the state health department, look at the solution that EMS came up with, and at the end we'll answer your questions. Firstly, let's have a look again at the series technology overview. In the series, we're going to look at a range of business basic installations ranging from large user count Pro 5 systems to moderate 5 to 25 user count Visual Pro 5 systems, and also large user count BBJ systems where they've utilized BBJ technology like data replication, triggers, the X-call to BBJ, Barista. And today we're going to look at large user count Pro 5 system, but with a twist. We're going to be looking at the browser user interface used in conjunction with the large user count Pro 5 system. So let's first start off with some background about EMS. EMS's core expertise is creating healthcare middleware. They're based in Clarence, New York, and founded in 1996. They provide programming and implementation services to the healthcare industry, and they have more than 1,000 users of various of their solutions. Today, however, we're going to focus on the support they provide to the Basis-based Diamond 725 solution and its customizations. It's a healthcare claims payment and adjudication solution. It was written in the late 1990s in Pro 5. So let's look at the background to EMS's customer. It's a large state healthcare department. Running Diamond 725, they have approximately 200 concurrent users, and that serves 390 community agencies, 84 private hospital inpatient units, 157 community residential programs, 674 adult care facilities, and 89 adult family homes. What does that all represent? That represents a pool of 360,000 people. That's based on 2010's numbers, who have services provided to them by the state. What is the business challenge? Well, not surprisingly, in these economic times, it's really important that the state contains its costs and that care providers bill the state for their services rendered. However, one needs to institute financial control, some limits on what those services could consist of in a particular period or would be covered, and there's a need for the provider to determine patient eligibility quickly. Sometimes the patient may have exceeded the benefit limits as set down by the state, and it's a critical cost issue for both the state and the providers. The state needs to control the costs, and the providers need to ensure eligibility, verify it before rendering the services and or charging for them outside of the state's contract. There were some very important criteria that the state laid down. The solution needed to be accessible via the internet by the providers, needed to be cost effective. After all, we don't want to have serious cost overruns for a solution that's intended to contain costs. Needed to be cross-platform. More about that in a bit. It needed to be resource efficient. Needed to be very easy to maintain. As is often the case with various health programs, changes will undoubtedly come down the line. It needs to be technologically compatible with the existing Pro 5 system, and needs to be intuitive for the users to use. After all, these providers are out there in the field. They're the medical service providers to the state health plan, and there's no opportunity to really go out and train all of these users individually. And it needed to be easily implemented with a smooth rollout plan. Karen Parker, Senior Software Engineer of EMS, will join us today to help field some of your questions. But let me read out her words of her recollection of the initial process. They approached us with a service limitation need, and then discussions started. The idea came to mind of a web portal that we had heard about when we attended TechCon. I was not familiar with GUI development, but it was easy enough to harvest the business basic logic from the application. The web portal that Karen remembered was Basis's browser user interface, and so the EMS solution was to create a browser user interface program to access the claims history and adjudication information in the Diamond database in Pro5. The provider portal then provided a view to the patient services remaining or used, and it was cross-platform, meeting one of the key needs of the health plan. Available via the browser access, again meeting the needs of a very easy implementation, delivering a familiar and intuitive interface. And in terms of cost control, it uses current Basis technology that was available to the end-user customer at no additional charge because they were current on SAM and therefore had access to the latest releases of Basis product, even though they were running Pro 5. And it preserved the existing business rules and implemented those business rules in the new solution. Let's talk a little bit about the state's technology structure. They were running Pro 5, and as I said, they were on SAM. They were covered by maintenance and had access to the latest and greatest versions of BBX. Their servers running the Diamond application, and they had a second server that they implemented with BBJ and Buoy. And they also had a server that was hosting the LDAP and web server process for their portal that they had available for their providers. They needed to support certain minimum number of browsers, i.e. 8 with the Google plugin, Firefox and Chrome. Let's talk briefly about the environment that they had. I mentioned early on that they had Pro 5 in this monolithic single-tiered architecture with some 200 concurrent users connecting into the Pro 5 database running the Diamond 725 character user interface application. Now when they added the browser user interface component, they needed to run BBJ on a second server, and that BBJ connected into the Pro 5 data via the Pro 5 data server, and that then delivered the face of the application via the browser user interface in the browser on the desktops of the providers. Let's look at those three tiers of Basis technology employed by the new solution. Firstly, the database layers running on IBM AIX operating system. So that's the Pro 5 data, now accessible via the Pro 5 data server from the second layer, the application layer, running on a Linux box. So BBJ GUI programs were running on the application servers on Linux with the embedded business logic harvested as is from the Pro 5 production codes. That same code could merely be re-implemented in the GUI application that was then going to be presented in the third tier, the presentation layer on the actual PCs of the providers, running either Windows or Linux or Apple Mac. Those desktop browsers could be running Chrome, Firefox or IE8. No terminal emulations on those browsers, no JVMs on those desktops, just a simple browser to access the application. So once again, the three different layers, database layer on the IBM AIX system coexisting with the Pro 5 code on the production system, a second application layer on a separate Linux box, and then finally the presentation layer on all the providers' PCs. So let's look at the implementation plan. Firstly, there was a need to harvest that business logic from the character user interface Diamond app and move that logic from Pro 5 to BBJ and create a GUI interface. Of course, moving the logic is trivial. There's no change required to that code except to check for reserved word usage. And then a little bit of a complication for EMS and for the state health plan. They wanted to utilize the user authentication that was already provided with their website, with their web portal for their providers. So that involved a third system, a third server, but with the benefit of BBJ being able to take advantage of LDAP connections, that was possible. There was minimal training for the providers. Lookups were available by name or subscriber number. And here's what the existing GUI application looked like. So here we will see the subscriber number, and once that information is input, we see down below the various descriptions of the benefits available, the basic amounts, the accumulation that it's actually being utilized, and what the remaining amounts are. So the goal was to mimic that, and so that was mimicked in the GUI application, the GUI implementation, and this is what it looks like running in Chrome, in Firefox, again making sure that those are similar, and then in the Internet Explorer 8. But enough of the screenshots. Let's have a look at the GUI application in action. From the web portal, we log in, does the authentication to the LDAP server, and then fires up the GUI application, the BBJ application. And here we can enter either the client number with the date that we wish to see benefits status to, affirm some of the legal compliancy, and then click on Submit button. We see the description of benefits. We can scroll up and down and see what's been allocated, what's been used, and what's remaining. We could also do the search based on the last name, the date of birth of the client, and the social security number. We can then click on the Find Client button, and we'll see those that match. Obviously this should only be one with those three pieces of information. Select the date again, affirm the legal compliancy, and once again we're presented with the benefit information that the provider needs to determine whether to bill the member directly or let the process go through to the state. When we log out, we go back to the portal. Here's what David Kaminsky, President and CEO of EMS, had to say once the project was over. The state was establishing critical service limitations for the first time and had to have a way for doctors' offices to access real-time decision-making information. The BASIS team was able to guide us through the process of using state-of-the-art technology that meshed internet connectivity to legacy Pro5 data. The resulting BUI app was well received and completely relevant to the success of the state initiative. What are some of the challenges along the way? The Diamond support team from EMS were not familiar with writing GUI code, so they had to get used to the idea of creating a GUI application. And they needed to get all of the moving parts working together in unison. The data server, the application server, and probably the most tricky was the authentication logic from the third-party LDAP server. And of course, working as a remote vendor with a state health agency, they weren't always able to have access to all of the environments when needed. So that made the process somewhat complicated. And then finally, getting the look and feel of the BUI app to work the same in all three browsers that they wish to support did require some tinkering and tweaking of the application. So how did they make all of that work? Well, they created the screens with BBJ and the BASIS IDE, and they modeled them as you saw after the legacy Diamond character user interface app. They wrote a small user authentication front end that was able to be managed by LDAP. The authentication could be managed by LDAP. And that successful login then launched the BUI application. But let's look most importantly at what the business benefits were to the end user, to the state health plan. Since the BUI app uses the data from the actual adjudication database, the healthcare providers have up-to-the-minute service eligibility information, not even day-old information that might have been available if the information had been ported to a third-party database. Healthcare providers in any location now have access to summarized patient service history and can make informed decisions regarding future authorizations and treatments. And finally, a major benefit to the providers is they're able to see an increase in their cash flow by determining upfront whether the patient needs to settle them directly or whether the plan as provided by the state would cover the costs of the treatment being provided. Let's talk a little bit about the licensing information. There were some 500 active providers that needed to have access to the information on the database. But the good news is we only need to allow for the concurrent users from a licensing perspective. And the maximum they've reached thus far has been 25 concurrent users. So only additional 25 user licenses were needed. The single production license can power up to 200 Pro5 sessions and can power the provider's browser access from the BUI application. So a single license serves up both the production system running in Pro5 as well as the BBJ buoy component running in the browsers in the provider's offices. And one can implement an options file within the licensing structure to reserve licenses for production and buoy application users to ensure that they don't step on each other. So what other options might have been available to EMS and to the state health plan? Before buoy, BB, developer choices would have been to look at implementing 3 component languages and technologies to provide the same solution. Have a CGI scripting language such as Perl and PHP. Have advanced HTML to render the information on the desktop. And then, of course, the back-end business logic, the adjudication engine, needed to be made available. And then data access could either be provided by the ODBC JDBC bridge into the basis database or from native server-side BBX code, much like has been done in the existing production system. So if one looks at those non-buoy alternatives, the CGI scripting language gets and validates the user input, and then it either invokes something like the basic web utility to apply the business rules in standard business basic code, or it would use the ODBC JDBC bridge to get the data and reapply the business rules written in the CGI. Or one could write a web service to apply the business rules, again from that same set of code, and consume it from the CGI scripting language. And then finally, you'd still need to use advanced HTML to format and display the output in the browser of the provider. So having that background, let's have a quick look at some of the pros and cons of buoy versus CGI, HTML, etc. One of the obvious benefits is we're using the same language as the production application to deliver the browser user interface application. We reuse all of our business rules. The adjudication engine is right at hand for us to utilize. And we can test and debug in GUI, simply deploy and do final testing in buoy, a lot easier than utilizing CGI, HTML, and or JDBC, ODBC bridge technology. It's a single technology stack, a lot less brittle. Of course, on the con side, for the EMS Diamond team, they still needed to learn some GUI. What does the road ahead offer for EMS and for the state health plan? There's a possibility of using the same browser user interface application to access data from non-basis database management system data. That means other components of the state health plan's systems can also be merged into this browser user interface application for providers to use. And that's because the basis language is portable and data access can be independent of database by utilizing the full SQL access capability of Business Basic. One of the other next steps on the road ahead might be to introduce cascading style sheets, CSS, to improve the look and feel of the application. To give you a quick taste of that, this is what a simple customer information screen would look like with default CSS as shipped from basis. And this is a radically improved look by utilizing some CSS. With the advanced CSS, we're able to do things like have rounded edges, different background colors, bolded labels for the various areas of data on the screen, being able to use different colors for the background for the read-only controls, and even when we have focus on a particular cell, we can change the color and perhaps even change the font to highlight that and bring it to the attention of the user. So significant improvements on the look and feel of the application, the usability of the application by implementing CSS. A more radical look of that is our mortgage app that we show on our default website. This is what it looks like sort of naked without any CSS, and that's what it looks like with some radical CSS applied to the application. There's more on that in the Java break that's entitled Buoy and CSS. So let's summarize what we've covered today. We've looked at how the application has met all of the state's original criteria. It's accessible via the internet. It's cost effective, no additional cost for licensing, no additional cost of training of programmers or programmers with different skills. It's cross-platform. You're able to deliver it from a AIX server across to a Linux application server, and then finally to the desktop of the providers, be they running on an Apple Mac on a Windows desktop or on Linux. Resource efficient, very minimal resource required on the desktops of the providers. Anything that runs any decent recent modern browser is sufficient. Very easy to maintain. It's a standard Business Basic program and technologically compatible to the existing Pro5 AIX system. And intuitive for the users to use. Very simple interface, very simple but powerful information that makes a significant difference to the providers and to their health plan. And easily implemented with a smooth rollout to the users via their standard web portal provider login and authentication. So before we take your questions, we would obviously like to hear from you about your own success stories. Do you have one you wish to share? Please contact your account manager and share that information with us. Of course, a lot of what you heard about today was kicked off from information that EMS gained and the end user gained from attending the last TechCon. So make plans yourself to attend the next TechCon in Las Vegas, Nevada. Mark your calendars for May 13th to the 15th for the TechCon and for training on May 16th and 17th. Let's take your questions.